Welcome back to my channel, horror fans. Today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's both tragic and frankly terrifying: wrongful executions. We're talking about 5 cases where people were punished for crimes they didn't commit. Cases that make you question everything. Buckle up, because some of these stories are just rough, man. Look, we all know the justice system isn't perfect, right? But when it comes to taking a life, you'd hope they'd be damn sure. Sadly, as we're about to see, that hasn't always been the case. These stories are haunting reminders of the human cost of getting things wrong, of rushing to judgment, and of the long shadow that injustice casts. We're going to look at the facts, the evidence, and the aftermath of these miscarriages of justice. So grab your thinking caps, maybe a comfort item. I've got my trusty teddy bear plushie, and let's get into it. Our first case takes us to 1921 Melbourne, Australia. Picture this: a bustling city still recovering from the Great War, a sense of normalcy returning. And then 12-year-old Alma Tyrchka is found murdered. The city is gripped by fear, the newspapers are screaming for justice, and the police are under immense pressure to find the killer. Enter Colin Campbell Ross, a local bar owner. He becomes a suspect, and things spiral quickly. Ross had a history, some petty theft, some shady business dealings, but was he a killer? The evidence was shaky, mostly circumstantial. Despite his pleas of innocence, Ross is found guilty and sentenced to death. The trial was a media circus, public opinion was firmly against him, and the jury was swayed by the prosecution's narrative. On April 24, 1922, he was hanged at Melbourne jail. Decades later, in the 1990s, a team of researchers re-examined the case using modern forensic techniques. The hair found on a blanket in Ross's bar wasn't a match to Alma. After years of campaigning, Ross was granted a full pardon in 2008. This case is a stark reminder that sometimes the system gets it wrong and the consequences are devastating. Let's crank the time machine back to 1660 to the quiet English village of Charingworth. This is a story of betrayal, mistaken identity, and a twist of fate that's straight out of a Gothic novel. Our unfortunate player in this historical drama is William Harrison, a man who had the misfortune of disappearing at the worst possible time. Harrison was a tenant farmer, and when he vanished, suspicion immediately fell upon his servant, John Perry. Perry, prone to fits and bouts of rambling, cracked under the pressure of the investigation. He confessed to Harrison's murder, claiming his mother and brother were also in on it. Perry and his family, despite their protestations of innocence, were found guilty and hanged for Harrison's murder. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. 2 years later, Harrison shows up, having been abducted and sold into slavery. He eventually escaped and made his way back to Charingworth, only to find that his supposed murderers had been hanged in his place. The villagers, understandably shocked, were left to grapple with the horrifying reality of what they'd done. The reappearance of William Harrison sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. It became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fallibility of human judgment and the dangers of coerced confessions. This case is a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the truth is far stranger and far more tragic than fiction. Fast forward now to 1952, London. The city is still rebuilding after the war, and there's a sense of unease in the air. It's in this climate that we meet Derek Bentley, a young man with learning disabilities who gets caught up in a situation that will tragically define his life. Derek was a follower, not a leader, easily influenced, and craved acceptance. That's how he ended up on a rooftop with Christopher Craig, a 16-year-old bad influence. They were planning to burgle a warehouse, a youthful indiscretion that would have tragic consequences. The police were called, things escalated, and shots were fired. Derek didn't fire the fatal shot. It was Christopher Craig who pulled the trigger, killing a police officer. Despite this, both Derek and Christopher were charged with murder. Derek's learning disabilities played a huge role in how he was perceived and treated by the justice system. He had a mental age of 11, and his confession, later found to be coerced, was riddled with inconsistencies. The jury, swayed by the prosecution's portrayal and public outcry, found Derek Bentley guilty of murder. Derek was hanged on January 28, 1953, at the age of 19. Derek's case remains a chilling example of how systemic biases and flawed application of the law can lead to irreversible consequences. Our next case takes us to the segregated American South of 1944. This is the story of George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old African-American boy who was robbed of his life by a system rigged against him. Alcaloo, South Carolina, a small segregated town where racial tensions simmered beneath the surface. Two young white girls, Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames, are found murdered. The pressure to find the killer is immense, and the white authorities are quick to pin the crime on someone to quell the fear. Their gaze falls on George Stinney Jr., a black teenager who lived in the same area as the victims. The evidence against him, scant to say the least. There were no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence linking him to the crime. What they did have was a coerced confession, extracted after hours of interrogation without a lawyer or his parents present. The trial lasted a mere 2 hours, and the jury, all white, deliberated for just 10 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. George Stinney Jr., barely a teenager, was sentenced to death. On June 16, 1944, George was led to the electric chair. In 2014, after years of campaigning, a judge vacated George's conviction, citing a great and fundamental injustice. George Stinney Jr.'s story is a chilling reminder of the human cost of prejudice and the dangers of rushing to judgment. Our final case brings us to the Sunshine State, Florida in 1990. Jesse Tafferow was convicted of the murders of a Florida Highway Patrol officer and a Canadian constable during a botched robbery attempt in 1976. He maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed by his girlfriend, Sonia Jacobs, who was also convicted. The evidence against Tafferow was shaky, largely hinging on unreliable eyewitness testimony. There were also allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, with claims that evidence was withheld and witnesses were coached. Despite these concerns, Tafferow was sentenced to death. He spent years on death row, fighting for his life, appealing his conviction. In 1992, 2 years after Tafferow's execution, Jacobs's conviction was overturned. New evidence emerged that pointed to another man as the actual shooter. This man later confessed to the murders, but it was too late for Jesse Tafferow. He had been executed 2 years earlier, and the execution was botched. Witnesses described horrifying scenes of flames erupting from Tafferow's head. Jesse Tafferow's story is a stark reminder that the death penalty is not about justice, it's about vengeance. Well, there you have it, folks. 5 stories, each more tragic and enraging than the last. 5 lives cut short, 5 families shattered by a system that failed them in the most profound way. These cases, as difficult as they are to stomach, force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The justice system isn't infallible, it's a human system run by humans, and humans make mistakes. But when those mistakes cost lives, we have a responsibility to do better, to demand better. We need to talk about these cases, to remember these names, to learn from these tragedies. We need to push for reforms, to advocate for the wrongfully convicted, to fight for a system that values truth and justice over expediency and finality, because in the end, these aren't just stories. These are people's lives, and it's up to us, the living, to make sure their deaths weren't in vain. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay skeptical. And as always, don't forget to check in on your loved ones, hug your pets a little tighter, and appreciate the precious, fragile nature of life. See you in the next one.